So there's so much information today and concern about missing children and also missing adults as well. And the missing people's cause has become paramount recently, especially over the last few years. You see just countless documentaries about it, serial dramas, and not just over the last few years, actually just over the decades. There's been a growing social conscious awareness about the issue that numbers of people are going missing, are vanishing, disappearing. Um, there always have been that, but I think there's a growing awareness of that, and that's partly fueled by a growing access to social media that people have. They're able more to document their own individual stories, and also there's a growing sort of awareness of its newsworthy content as well. That it's something that's sellable, that it's a story that relates to people, that also has different dimensions to it. It's sad, it's tragic, it's heartbreaking for the family, and their long searching and long suffering is something that many people can relate to, but also sympathise with and feel pity for. And so it's probably something that's always been, since antiquity, a story that's resonated with audiences. But I think there's been a growing social awareness about that over the decades, and especially over the last few years. And more recently, there's been a growing kind of presence about missing children reports online, especially throughout the internet. And I see, like on YouTube, for example, a whole load of a conveyor belt of missing persons and also missing children stories, the documentaries about various incidents, various children that have gone missing throughout different years, throughout different decades. And so we're seeing not that there are necessarily more people going missing or children, but that there are more reports of that, whether that's through online videos, blogs, tweets, Twitters, Facebook posts, through videos, through documentaries, online, on TV, or through whatever media. We're seeing so many documented incidences of those occurrences. As to whether they're occurring more than they did, yes, they are, and they have been gradually increasing, and they naturally would do because, of course, the population has increased over the years. In the last 20, 25 years, the population of the world globally doubled, for example. In 50 years, it doubled too. So, naturally, all things increase, and the case of missing people will increase too. That's to be expected. But the number of cases of missing people varies considerably. But also, when you see a lot of these different videos or different media talking about the general amount of missing people, you often see so much information that's not always sourced, that's not always evidence-backed, and that lacks a wider context. And I'll give you an example to that. So I was scrolling through my Facebook posts, and there was a claim that stated that something like 100,000 children go missing every year in America. And when I fact-checked that and I looked it up, researching, how accurate was that? Well, of course, the actual number, varied year by year and generally went up, but it sort of, the amount it went up by varied too. However, actually, that actual particular post seemed quite alarmist. It almost seemed like it was meant to cause panic, because it said, as part of the post, all these, over 100,000 children have gone missing in just 1 year, and think of how terrible things that could have happened to them would be. And, well, what they didn't tell you in that post was that the vast, overwhelming majority of those children actually, although they were reported missing at some point, were later found. Now, that wasn't all of them, but it was an overwhelming majority. They went on to stay with other relatives or friends or family. They ran away from their home life because they'd had some arguments, some domestic, or something at home was upsetting them, right? But they were okay, but they went to stay elsewhere. Some of them stayed elsewhere just until the argument had blown over, or they were able to go back home and they could make things up when things had cooled down and things were okay for them. Other people didn't. They stayed away. They lived with friends, families, squats, or with extended family, wherever. But those people, the vast majority, were found whether they returned home or not. Most of them did. Quite a lot didn't. There are also others that were taken away by family members, but were reported missing by the other family members still at home. That often happens with a divorce and a dispute over the paternal rights to a child, for example. There certainly are some occasions of that. And there are also runaways that are never found. And now, those are a minority, but they make up a significant minority of those overall numbers. But of those, however, we shouldn't think the worst of all of those, because actually it doesn't mean all of those were kidnapped and then murdered or tortured or something terrible, because actually a large number of those may well have gone off somewhere else but not been found or discovered for some time, or only to be discovered later. Because of course you find people that are undocumented or living all over the place, right? They could have ran away and still be living with friends, but have never been discovered, right? Or living in a squat, or be homeless, or in a hostel, or any number of places, right? And so, even though there's a small minority of the overall percentage that are never found, that doesn't mean all of those ones something terrible or sinister happened necessarily, because there will be a certain percentage of those that actually just moved elsewhere, and for whatever reason they couldn't keep in contact with home or where they'd left. They didn't want to, or they couldn't. So it's still terrible for that percentage of people that are murdered or abused or have whatever awful thing happen to them, right? But it's not that tremendous number that this post suggested it is. But it still doesn't stop it being a grave concern and an awful concern, and especially for the friends and family of that particular or those children. And actual fact, every case is unique and in particular, and cases vary tremendously. With adults, it's different, of course, than to children. Missing people with adults, it tends to be quite a different kind of scenario, because adults are more capable of running away. They have money, they have the know-how, they have friends they could stay with. Teenagers, less so, but circumstances sometimes force you or coerce you into doing things against your nature, or if you have to, Some people, would rather take the chances on the street or run away than if life at home is that bad, even if they run away and they don't know what they're going to, Um, with adults, on the other hand, not always, it varies, but some adults at least, they have more opportunity to leave a situation. It's like they're more likely as an adult, not to disappear without telling someone why or where they're going. Adults more powerful, has got more money, more control, more abilities, and is a better place therefore to say, you know what, I'm leaving this domestic abuse situation, I'm walking out, right? Whereas a child can't do that, and a teenager is in between those, isn't sure if they can do it or they can't do it, perhaps, right? Because you know you're somewhere between an adult and a child, right? It's hard. And so the missing people records are going to be vastly different for adults, for adolescents or teenagers, and for children too. Although it will be on a sliding scale, and there are exceptions to that, of course. There are cases you hear about of children that are very adept and able and somehow street savvy, and they make it on the street and they are able to survive. You hear this. There's adults that are just the opposite and quite incompetent and just not street, and they wouldn't be able to make it in the same way, right? So it's not all about age, of course. There are exceptions to the rule, but in general, adults are much more likely, if they are run away, if they're reported missing, right, to go off and have left and started a new life somewhere else and just didn't want anyone else to know about it. Whereas with a child, you worry more if they're never found, because they're less capable of doing that. Certainly there are some that do, right? As I say, the exception to the rule. But with teenagers, it's more kind of in the middle, right? It depends. It depends a lot on their abilities, on the circumstances, on who they meet, chance encounters, and so many variables. Anyway, it's really sad when you hear about just how many people go missing. But I don't get that concerned about how many adults go missing so much. Because I think a lot of them, some of them at least perhaps, want to be missing, or don't feel that they were missed at all. Right. Some of those adults, on the other hand, are actually perhaps and potentially murder victims, right? And it depends where you are in the world as well. Like if you look at, I'm talking in very general terms, and I'm in the UK, so here that I'm talking specifically about here. But let's pretend we're living in Central America or South America, certain parts of South America. I'm not going to say it's all like that. It's not. Certain parts of South America, right? There are some dangerous areas. Even adults get kidnapped, and they get forced to work in labouring jobs at gunpoint sometimes, or their family being threatened, all sorts, right? There are adults, and I'm not talking about tens of thousands, I'm talking about literally millions over the decades that have gone missing. Perhaps, who knows what happened to them, right? So, certainly, in terms of missing people, right, there are many adults in certain parts of the world, right? It varies a lot, of course, right? And there's specific areas of different parts of the world, like where adults are more likely to be killed or disappeared, forced into some anonymous prison regime where they're living in some far-flung factory farm where no one knows them, and they lost contact with all the people they once knew. It's terrible to think, because we thought, that kind of kidnapping, that abduction from Africa to America, that was consigned to history and that was all part of the past. But sad to know that's what's going on still in some parts of South America and in other regions of the world, perhaps, right? I'm sure of it. However, those probably do reflect localized areas. And in general, most adults, right, most of the time, not all the time, but most adults are capable, at least, right, of leaving a situation if they want to, right? If they feel that threatened or harmed by something, and they do often, right? But, as I said, children are not in that position, not capable of doing that. So if you hear about missing children's reports, then it tends to be obviously more concerning for that reason. And teenagers run away. I wouldn't say that's normal, but it's normal if you happen to be in a highly domestically volatile situation. Yes, of course it is. And who wouldn't? You go and stay with friends, family, or your local drug dealer, probably, if they were nice to you, rather than somebody who's abusing you in your own household, right? I know I would, but and certainly as an adult, that goes for you too, right? But if you're a child and you're under those same abuses, right, you can't run away and you can't escape it in that way. And so there's even some cases that you hear about of children reported missing who aren't missing. They never left the house, in fact, right? That happens a lot too. When I say a lot, I mean globally. It does, in terms of the whole amount of missing children or people. It's a very, very tiny fraction of it, of course. Right? I just think it's so important to get everything in proportion, though, in life. I think balance is the key to dealing with the issue personally. That's because I do think it's like the disappearance of young children is something to not vex, but anger, sadden, fury any parent, but any person actually, because we were all children once. We don't have to have had brothers or sisters we cared about, nephews or nieces or friends of children, I mean children or friends, right? And we don't have to have cared about all of them to know that childhood is an innocent thing, a beautiful thing, a loving thing, a thing that we should cherish and protect, and that they are young, they're innocent, and that's what makes it worse, right? That's what really... So I get totally why there are so much attention and awareness about that more. But I suppose I am wary at the same time of the perils, perhaps, of over-exaggerating the dangers of it. But it's what I think is the key to it is always, in anything, balance, isn't it? Like, I don't want to over-stress what the actual terrors are, because it is terrorism, to abuse a child, to kidnap a child, or to do something to it. Like, psychological terrorism, emotional terrorism is what I will call it, right? Because actually, the trauma that a child lives with throughout their lives, right, and the ripple effect, the family that all absorb that and that all are affected by that as well. It's a deeply damaging thing, and it has profound effects. And so I'm just kind of wary about not making out the problem to be so exacerbated and to say it's everywhere. There are monstrous paedophiles lurking around every corner waiting to abduct your child, frog march them from the school gates to the home and never let them out of your sight, police them at all times and make sure you're aware of everything they're watching and who they're meeting. I wouldn't want to be like that all the time, although young children, they should be surveyed, of course, but when they get to a bit of an older age, you sort of want to give them a bit more leeway and a bit more room to sort of manoeuvre. But it's I don't want to put fear and panic into people. I don't want to make things seem worse than they are. I don't want it to seem like everyone's doing it and it's everywhere, because it's not, and it's not that bad, right? And it's not, and I think it would be wrong to fearmonger and to make things seem worse than they are, and to spread fear like that. Like if I say to someone, 100,000 children disappeared, who knows what happened to any of them, that would be wrong, because actually we do know what happened to most of them, right? And even the ones we don't know what happened to, some of them probably will be okay, but it's the ones that are not that you do worry about. And so I think it is balance, because it's like, yeah, you don't want to worry too much about that issue. You don't want to allow it to overwhelm you emotionally, or because it is a traumatic issue, right, for those that are directly involved with any child's disappearance, right? Especially for a mother, right? That's something that you carried inside of you, something that is part of you, that you nurtured and loved, right? Someone that you're deeply connected to, and now not only is separated from, you don't know them, and you horror, you have the horror of all the terror of all the different dreams of what could happen to them, or where they are. You know, that's a terrible thing for not just the mother, the wider family, father too, isn't it? You know, it's enough to send you mad and want to sort of hunt down whoever did it and find them, and, it's just like, your heart goes out to anyone like that. It's partly why I don't have children. It's the fear of that happening to them, to be honest. And obviously, we've got to continue having children. The species has got to continue, but we've all got to be more vigilant about, child welfare and protecting the most vulnerable, haven't we? And where they go, those few that are never found, well, this is where the balance comes down to, isn't it? Because yes, it's a relief to know that a lot of those children are reunited with their parents. They are, in the end, actually. That's always a good thing to know. I always think that's great. And whether there wasn't some issue that they had to resolve, or whatever it was, right? But there are always that percentage, however small as a whole, they still make up a significant number. If you multiply all the numbers, even though it's only a few hundred in this country each year, and a few hundred there, or a few thousand, or a few thousand there, according to the size of the country, and where it is, and how it's affected by the whole geopolitical system and everything, and our relationships with each other. You add up all the numbers in all the different regions, it does work out a large number of people. And that is concerning, and it is worthy, therefore, of lots more media attention, right? But it depends what kind of attention. And it has to try and be faithful to the evidence and to the facts of whatever that circumstance is, not just to the specific case of the individual, but when they're talking about the more general nature of missing people, missing children, right? They talk about the actual statistics of how many are reported missing and how many are never reported found. Because there's a difference. Don't be confused between the two. Because the number that are reported missing is a very, very, very high number. And the number that are reported never found is a very, very, very low number. A low number, maybe, but one's too many. I'm not saying I don't know what happens to those. Uh, we're talking about big numbers, of course. When you're talking about billions in the world, right? We're talking about vastly huge numbers. It could be millions of children, millions and millions, whether it's tens or hundreds of millions that are reported missing, right? Well, we're talking about thousands and thousands that are never found. Is that tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands? That's a lot. So, when you say, if I say like, oh, hundreds of thousands of children, it's a small number. It's a small number compared to the hundreds of millions of children reported missing. You get me? But hundreds of thousands of children isn't a small number when you think about it, though.